There can be no society without a shared memory of its history, where it has been, what are its core values and aspirations, who have been its architects. The Eminent Caribbean Jurists Awards was conceptualized in 2019 to recognize and celebrate those outstanding jurists who, by dint of their brilliance, hard work, and determination, have made a consequential contribution to Caribbean society. The 2021 installation of these awards pays homage to pioneering Caribbean women jurists who have built and are building the Caribbean society through their contributions to legal activism, adjudication, corporate governance, education, politics, and public service. These are women who have shattered glass ceilings and who have blazed an inspirational trail for the younger generation and indeed for all of us to follow.
The birth and growth of Caribbean states track closely our assumption of responsibility for our legal education and scholarship. In this regard, Caribbean women have made an indelible mark as legal educators and scholars.
Professor Rosemary Bell Antoine. Rosemary Bell Antoine, Professor of Labor Law and Offshore Financial Law, is an attorney, Cambridge Fellow, and award-winning internationally recognized author. Her career embodies excellence in research along with an outstanding record of transformational public service and leadership in the Caribbean region and beyond. As a leading scholar, versatile international consultant, and human rights development activist, her scholarship has stood out for its depth, diversity, creativity, and humanity.
Well, I think anybody who knows me knows I'm the quintessential Caribbean woman. And that is from birth, because my mother was Grenadian, Trinidadian, Martinican, and my father was European. I had it from a child. Then I went to Barbados at an early age, I consider myself an honorary Barbadian, married a St. Lucian, did a lot of work in the islands. My service training was in Dominican. It went on from there. So I've always seen, in fact, sometimes my husband tells me I'm a disloyal Trinidadian because sometimes I'm critical. So I actually do not see myself as belonging to one country. And I have worked and lived in practically, well, I believe all of them actually. So it comes easy for me. So it is, I find it very fitting, and I am more appreciative of the fact that it is a Caribbean award. And obviously the jurist part, I would see that as a great honor, because all of my work in law has been about not just sort of regurgitating law, but analyzing law, thinking about it in different ways, trying to provide solutions, etc., trying to give that broad perspective. So the term jurist, I think, fits as opposed to lawyer or attorney, which is kind of narrow.
I think the good thing about Professor Antoine is that she's not just an armchair intellectual. She breathes life into what she believes and she practices. And I think that philosophical outlook can find expressions, first of all, in what she writes, how she writes, and the conclusions that she reaches. And secondly, the causes that she champions as an activist and as an academic.
Well, in terms of my professional career and consultancies and so, I think I might be the only legal academic and one of very few lawyers who I see myself as multidisciplinary. I always thought of myself as being born in the wrong time. I thought I should have been in the Renaissance times, because I think I would have enjoyed doing all of these various disciplines and fields of study, because I paint, I like, I have this artistic thing. And even in terms of the intellectual activity. I liked science. I was a science student. I did special maths, but I liked history. I liked literature. I couldn't choose, so I always liked all of these various things. Interestingly, I see that is what is now happening in the world of business. We are moving away from the specializations. I used to worry about it when I was younger, that maybe, jack of all trades kind of thing. But they've actually dovetailed nicely as I matured as a professional. When I look at an issue, when I look at a problem, I see many facets of it. So I think it's just really me, it's my life, it's my personality, and it just sort of comes through, it flows through everything I do.
Very early on, she emphasized a lot of social causes in her writings. She wanted to touch law that basically reflected the lives of people and the issues that people faced on a daily basis. So she was one of the first Caribbean intellectuals that focused heavily on the death penalty, although that particular interest arose out of a stint she had in the United Kingdom while a student at University of Cambridge. Then, if you notice that in recent times, she's spent a lot of time researching the plight of women who are prisoners on remand. And she took one additional step, and that is to say to launch a constitutional motion arguing essentially that the incarceration of women for very lengthy periods in prison effectively compromise their constitutional rights.
Ironically, I think I was less known in Trinidad and Tobago than in other parts of the Caribbean, where I'd been working for a long time. So I have had, as I said, I've had the good fortune of being able to work with all various persons in various fields. And I've also been fortunate from a very young age. I was given opportunities to lead in projects. So when I was a young pup, at the university and the CARICOM harmonization of labor law, which was a huge project that many older ones had tried and we hadn't concluded. This is the university. My former dean remembered that I was a labor law specialist and I loved labor law, and I gave that to me and I did that. And from then it sort of, it became, that itself was a formation for labor law in the region. But from there, I was always fortunate to somehow get asked to do these sort of legal projects, but which have so many different facets to them.
She, in later life, went on to become a jurist while she served with other colleagues from the Caribbean and Latin America. She focused on championing the rights of indigenous peoples and trying to make a connection between their constitutional rights and, of course, the protection of their indigenous lands and indigenous environment. In addition to this, of course, she also focused on issues that were unpopular, the plight of Haitians in the Dominican Republic, and was brave enough to have interrogated an issue of racism in the United States. I mean, it's almost unknown of that the OAS Human Rights Tribunal looked at issues in the US, but she did so that, in fact, she was a living example of what she wrote, what she preached, what she practiced.
I feel very touched when I am able to do that I'm able to reach quote unquote ordinary man and woman in the Caribbean as opposed to a lawyer or a law student. And I feel that somehow I'm making some sort of contribution. For me, when I think about myself, I think about myself as a creative person. So although I am into the law primarily, that to me is just a tool. I still see myself as essentially creative in everything I do. So that I know these days we say innovative, but I still like the word creative. And perhaps the fact that this is about pioneering women, or in terms of the jurists, I feel that is very appropriate for me. That really, when I look back at all the work I've done over the years in so many different fields, I have been able I've had the opportunity, and it's something I take great pride in and I appreciate, that the work I've done has been new. It hasn't been something, and it has been able to solve or lead the way. Sometimes people don't know that I've been doing it in the background. But I see the results. I see the change, whatever report I do, whatever law I draft, etc. in the region, I've seen, okay, this has changed. So for example, if you look at this Industrial Labor Code, it's the first jurisdiction that actually protected HIV as a particular ground, specific ground. In fact, it's still the only one I drafted. It would have specifically protected LGBT rights. I had the opportunity as a labor law doing this, brought in my human rights. So I can look through the work I've done over the years and see that creativity and put in a sort of a practical way, because I'm a practical person. So those are the things that I think when I consider my career that stand out for me, and the great opportunities I've had to meet so many Caribbean people.
So you're dealing with an academic that's not just a theoretician, an academic solely concerned with jurisprudence, but an academic who wanted to change lives, touch lives, and make a difference in the lives of persons who may not have had the opportunity to seek legal redress, legal counsel, legal advice, but who perhaps could not retain lawyers to champion whatever rights that they may have had. So you're dealing with a very unusual academic in that sense. She has brought law to life.
Miss Norma Ford. The story of Norma Monica Ford would be incomplete without mentioning that in the 1950s, she was one of the few female radiographers in the Caribbean and perhaps the Commonwealth. Now in her 95th year, she wishes to be held in public memory as a woman who learned early what she wanted and was capable of, and who was prepared to work for it to the absolute limit of her energy and ability, and thus claim her achievements as the fruit of her intellect and labor. Generations of Barbadian children remember her as Auntie Monica, the fun-loving host of a weekly children's program. In 1970, when the Faculty of Law of the University of the West Indies opened its door to its first class, Norma changed course. An avid and brilliant student who continued to work in media while studying after graduating, Norma chose the path of an academic and law lecturer at the Faculty of Law, where she remained for the rest of her working life. Chair of the historic National Commission on the Status of Women, in 1976 the Ford Commission heralded the beginning of almost 3 decades of intense public service for Norma Ford.
Well, 2 things about Norma. She is a strong academic. She's known for her academic ability. She's known for her broadcasting skills. But she had a very warm, sort of fragrance, that's the only thing I can call it. Very much, you're sort of swept up into the whole of Norma, the clothes and the jewelry and the very, very particular ways of doing things, and her voice. And she had this very red, short cut. So she was very, very sort of iconic. You couldn't, there was nobody else who looked like Norma or spoke like Norma. Her name was synonymous with teaching family law for whole generations of children who never even knew she was a teacher. She was Auntie Monica. So she had like these two personalities. There was Norma Ford, the academic, and then there was Auntie Monica, the broadcaster. So there were like 2 different people. And I don't know that not everybody realized they were the same person. Children certainly didn't. They knew her as Auntie Monica. And so she has a following as Auntie Monica, and she has a following as an academic. It's been difficult in the last 2 years because we've been under lockdown. She's been unable to move about as she would want to, and she's a fiercely independent person. She's also extremely private. You won't find anything online about Norma. There is nothing. she just really is a marvelous person, quite inspirational, Somebody who decided early on, I am not going to be this kind of woman that people expect of me. I am going to be the kind of woman that I want to be. And she decided that early, and she did it without a lot of fanfare or drama. She just lived life according to her own terms. Monica was brought up where she was expected to get married. She went to one of the best schools, well, the best schools, not one of them, but the premier school. It was understood that she was being educated to be somebody's wife. And as she said very early on, she was not about that at all. And she had an interest in science, and she just didn't understand why she wasn't allowed to do what she wanted to do. But as she said, she was a very sort of amenable child. She was very obedient. What her teacher said to do, they said to do modern studies, so she did modern studies. She had an interest in reading scientific literature. She did have an interest in law. I think she realized that she had quite an agile mind, but there was nothing around her that was encouraging her to move any further than going into the government service or being a teacher or something like that. So I think she had a sense very early on that she was feeling thwarted in what she wanted to do, and she was always looking for opportunities. So she knew she wasn't getting married, so that meant that she had to work to support herself. So she did what was the best thing. She applied to government, and she was willing to work anywhere. She didn't choose radiology. She just went where she was sent. But then she found, again, she had a scientific mind and she had an aptitude. And I think from the point that she realized when she went to England that her brain, as she said, worked just as well as any man's brain that she had suspected when she was at school, she figured she could just do whatever she put her mind to. And what was more, she could do as many things as she wanted to at the same time. And she really wasn't afraid of that kind of work. She's very, very, very agile mind and really physically very active and limber in all her ways, able to stretch herself. She's known in Barbados as a broadcaster first and foremost. When people think of her, they connect her with broadcasting. So I think she was there, and then the faculty opened, and women, herself and Excellency Dame Sandra Mason, who is our Governor General right now, they went into the faculty as the first women from Barbados in the faculty. She did it because I think her mind needed constant stimulation. She's not the kind of person that can just sit and do one thing. Her mind needed that constant stimulation. And it was there, and there's where she went. And she found it interesting from day one. And my senior, when I was in private practice, he said she was absolutely the brightest woman he's ever met, one of the brightest people. And his view was if she was going to be so good at studying, he was just going to tag along and make sure that he got some of the, some of her good habits, like studying all night. So I think it was because it was there and the opportunity presented itself, and she needed the additional stimulation. The law degree is a full-time law degree. Nobody else was working. No one else was working. And Norma was very obviously working because she was on the radio. I mean, she loves to recount how she thought she was getting away with it. I don't know how she thought she was getting away with it. She couldn't afford to give up broadcasting because she had to support herself. She wasn't married. She didn't have a government job. So it wasn't like if she was on leave. It was the government TV station, but it wasn't a matter of it being in the civil service where you could get leave. It's a statutory corporation. So she had to keep on working. And her program was very, very, very popular. So she just continued to do it. She could also do it because of that huge capacity for work and because of her ability to work throughout the night. She is a real night owl, and she starts to become alive late. So she was able, even if she missed classes, and was able to schedule her work around working at the station, she was then able to work out, right through the night. to get her work done. She did the law degree and she decided that she would become an academic again because, as she said, well, if I went to law school, who was going to support me? I don't think she was ever interested in doing law as that sort of practical career. She was interested in research. She did a master's right after her degree at the law faculty, and she did it in family law. And I think that's where her interest really was peaked when she started to realize the grave restrictions that women labored under in every area of the society: religion, education, social services, employment. Every single area had deficiencies, and she was able. That's where she found her interest: succession, inheritance laws, in which she's quite an expert. When you think about Barbados and the role of women and how forward-thinking our legislation had been, I mean, for quite a long time, quite far ahead of most Caribbean countries, it was due largely to that Ford report. She was the chairperson, the chairwoman of the Ford Commission, the commission that bore her name. And she pointed out very early, these are the areas that are important for women, and they made hundreds of recommendations. I mean, the document goes to 2 big fat volumes. Not all of the recommendations have been actually enacted up to this date, but the majority have been. And in those recommendations was changing the Succession Act, which we did, changing the Maintenance Act, completely new Family Law Act. A lot of it dealt with women and employment and their access to capital, their inability to get loans. A lot of it dealt with social services, with maternity leave. That Ford report was a watershed for us in Barbados because it provided, it really gave people an understanding of how women lived in Barbados.
Velma Newton came of age in the 1960s as part of an independence generation of Caribbean scholars and intellectuals who spent their careers helping to build newly independent Caribbean societies through a life of professional achievement and public service. It is no accident that she chose to devote her career to the law, a field that holds the different countries of the Commonwealth Caribbean together, or that she spent her career at the University of the West Indies, one of the region's most enduring institutions. Historian, librarian, and jurist Professor Velma Newton has made a global impact through her professional activities and contribution to law library development.
When I was growing up, my aunt, with whom I spent a lot of time, she felt I should have become a lawyer because I was interested in politics from an early age. But then I didn't do law early on. I went, as you would have seen from the biography, I majored in history and so on. But once I became an archivist first, and then I moved to the law library at Cave Hill, it was clear that library staff needed to know more about the law with which they worked on a daily basis if they were going to be building meaningful collections. And that is what drove me for the next few years. First, we had to improve statute law collection, that is legislation. We had to do better to purchase or to acquire copies of court decisions, which are the second major source of primary source of law. So that led to wanting to collection in hard copy, and eventually to establishment of the Carry Law database and ULIP indexes, things that we could share in electronic format with the other campuses. All of us do not have the same drive, but the tools that I left behind in the law library, if their development is pursued with the same diligence that I applied, should serve the region as well as we were serving it a few years ago.
Well, my earliest memory of her traveling was when she went to do research when I was little to Panama to do the research that ended up completing the book, which was her master's thesis. And over the course of my childhood, we traveled across the Caribbean with books by C.L.R. James, Walter Rodney, Eric Williams. A lot of my copies of those books were her copies that she used at university. And I grew up with those. Like, I don't remember ever not knowing who Walter Rodney was. I think her early career and her early learning as a historian of the Caribbean has really informed her commitment to a system of regional law and to the integrity of law across the region. So there was a real sense of a generational mission. And I do think that she's probably right that there's not the same, that same motivation. Well, I thought it was wonderful that she's being recognized by the peers who mean the most to her.
It is timely because so often the contribution of women in most spheres of life, I wouldn't say it's forgotten, but sometimes, and especially in the legal profession. I'm not a young person anymore, but I still feel that we need to do a bit more in terms of reforming some areas of the law in the region. That now that a female and one with the reputation of the current Secretary General is in place at the CARICOM Secretariat, that more of these initiatives will be taken to fruition. I think it is timely that the role of women, not just as legislative drafters, but as politicians and whatever areas to which we've contributed should be recognized. So I think it is a good initiative on the part of the CCJ.